Good evening, and welcome to WANA Live, the reading series of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. I'm your host, Damian Dressick. This is your other host,
Christina Fasonic. So tonight is a special night for WANA Live for a couple of reasons. One, tonight is our celebration of our third anniversary as a writing series,
which we are truly grateful for. We're going to have one of the giants of modern Appalachian literature on tonight for your listening and viewing pleasure. We've got the inimitable, the one and only Ron Rash with us tonight.
Yeah, so I know that for most of our viewing audience, he needs no introduction, but would you like to do so?
I will. Ron Rash is the author of the 2009 Faulkner finalist and New York Times bestseller Serena, and also Above the Waterfall, in addition to 4 prize-winning novels, including The Cove, One Foot in Eden, Saints at the River, and The World Made Straight. 4 collections of poems, 6 collections of stories, among them Burning Bright, which won the 2010 Frank O'Connor International Story Award, and Chemistry and Other Stories, which was the finalist for the 2007 Faulkner Award. Students of mine, that's where the story you're reading next week comes from, chemistry. Twice the recipient of an O. Henry Prize, Ron Rash teaches at Western Carolina University.
Well, I think we should bring him on.
Hello, good to be with you.
Thank you so much.
We're thrilled. So what are you going to read for us tonight?
I thought fitting the season of rebirth, I wanted to read a story set about 30 miles from where I am right now. And it's a Whitewater River. And it's a story that has a mystical angle, which I'm very much interested in. And I just want one brief thing. A hydraulic in a whitewater river is usually below a waterfall, and it's almost like being inside a washing machine. The water kind of works back sometimes under a rock, and things can get caught in it, and unfortunately, sometimes humans.
Yeah, so we will let you do your thing. We'll be back.
All right. Something rich and strange. She follows the river's edge downstream, leaving behind her parents and younger brother who still eat their picnic lunch. It is Easter break, and her father has taken time off from his job. They have followed the Appalachian Mountains south, stopping first in Gatlinburg, then the Smokies, and finally this river. She finds a place above a falls where the water looks shallow and slow. The river is a boundary between Georgia and South Carolina, and she wants to wade into the middle and place 1 foot in Georgia and 1 in South Carolina so she can tell her friends back in Nebraska she has been in 2 states at the same time. She kicks off her sandals and enters. The water so much colder than she imagined, quickly deeper, up to her kneecaps, the current surging under the smooth surface. She shivers. On the far shore, a granite cliff casts this section of river into shadow. She glances back to where her parents and brother sit on the blanket. It is warmer there, the sun full upon them. She thinks about going back, but is almost halfway now. She takes a step and the water rises higher on her knees. 4 more steps, she tells herself. Just 4 more, and I'll turn back. She takes another step and the bottom is no longer there, and she is being shoved downstream, and she does not panic because she has passed all her Red Cross courses. The water shallows and her face breaks the surface, and she breathes deep. She tries to turn her body so she won't hit her head on a rock, and for the first time she's afraid, and she's suddenly back underwater and hears the rush of water against her ears. She tries to hold her breath, but her knee smashes against a boulder, and she gasps in pain, and water pours into her mouth. Then for a few moments, the water pools and slows. She rises, coughing up water, gasping air, her feet dragging the bottom like an anchor, trying to snag waterlogged wood or rock jut. And as the current quickens again, she sees her family running along the shore, and she knows they are shouting her name, though she cannot hear them. And as the current turns her, she hears the falls and knows there's nothing that will keep her from it. As the current quickens and quickens, and another rock smashes against her knee, but she hardly feels it as she snatches another breath, and she falls, and the river falls, and she falls with it as water whitens around her, and she falls deep into the whiteness. And as she rises, her head scrapes against a rock ceiling, and the water holds her there, and she tells herself, don't breathe. But the need rises inside her, beginning in the upper stomach, then up through the chest and throat. And as that need reaches her mouth and nose open, and the lungs explode in pain. And then the pain is gone as bright colors shatter around her like glass shards. And she remembers her 6th grade science class, the gurgle of the aquarium at the back of the room, the smell of chalk dust. That morning, the teacher held a prism out the window so it might fill with color. She has a final, beautiful thought that she is now inside that prism and knows something even the teacher does not know, that the prism's colors are voices, voices that swirl around her head like a crown. And at that moment, her arms and legs, she did not even know were flailing, cease, and she becomes part of the river. The search and rescue squad and the sheriff arrived at the falls late that afternoon. 2 of the squad members were brothers, one in his early 20s, the other 30. They had a carpentry business, building patios and decks for lawyers and doctors from Greenville and Columbia who owned second homes in these mountains. The third man, the diver, was in his early 40s and taught biology at the county high school. Sheriff looked at his watch, figured that they had 2 hours at most before the gorge darkened. Even so, the diver did not hurry to put on his wetsuit and air tanks. He smoked a cigarette, between puffs talked to the sheriff about the high school's baseball team. They had worked together and knew death punched no time clock. When the diver was ready, a length of nylon rope was clasped tight under his arms. The older, stronger brother held the other end. The diver waded into the river, the rope trailing behind him like a leash. He dipped his mask in the water, put it on, and leaned forward. The 3 men on shore watched as the black fins propelled the diver into the hydraulic, ceaseless blizzard of whitewater. The men on the bank sat on rocks and waited. With his free hand, the older brother pointed upstream to a bend where he caught a 5-pound rainbow trout last fall. The sheriff asked what he'd used for bait, but didn't hear the answer because the mask bobbed up in the headwater's foam. The brother tightened the slack and pulled, but nothing gave until the others grabbed hold as well. They pulled the diver into the shallows and helped him onto shore. Between watery coughs, he told them he'd found her in the undercut behind the hydraulic. She'd been upright, her head and back and legs pressed against a rock slab. Only her hair moved, its long strands streaming upward. As the diver drifted closer, he saw that her eyes were open. Their faces were inches apart when he slipped an arm around her waist. Then the hydraulic ripped free the mask and mouthpiece, grabbed the dive light, spiraling it toward the darkness. The diver told the men kneeling beside him that the girl's blue eyes had life in them. He could feel her heart beating against his chest and hear her whispering. Before or after your mask was torn off, the sheriff asked. The diver did not know, but swore he'd never enter the river again. The younger brother scoffed, while the other spoke of narcosis, though the pool was no more than 20 feet deep. But the sheriff did not dismiss what the diver said. He too had seen strange and inexplicable things involving the dead, but had never mentioned them to others and did not choose to now. We'll find another way, he said. but that river has to lower some before I allow anyone else in there. The diver had trouble sleeping afterward. Every night when he closed his eyes, he saw the girl's wide blue eyes, the flowing golden hair. His wife slept beside him, her body curled into his chest. They had no children, and now he was glad for that. He had seen a picture of the parents in the local paper. They'd been on the shore within 30 feet of the undercut that held their daughter, the expressions on their faces beyond grief. On the third night, the diver fell into a deeper sleep, and the girl came with him. They were in the undercut again, but now the river was tepid and he could breathe. As he embraced her, she whispered that this world was better than the one above, and she should never have been afraid. He emerged in his wife's embrace. It's just a bad dream, she kept saying until he quit gasping. His wife closed her eyes and was quickly asleep, but he could not, so went into the kitchen and graded lab tests until dawn. The girl remained in the river. Volunteers cast grappling hooks from the banks and worked them like lures through the pool, or stood in shallows or on rocks and jabbed with long metal poles. Some of the old timers suggested dynamite, but the girl's parents would not hear of it. The sheriff said what they needed was a week without rain. The diver slept little the next few nights. In class, he placed the students in small groups and had them discuss assigned chapters among themselves. He knew they talked about the prom instead of pupae, but he didn't care. On the third afternoon, he skipped the teacher's meeting and sat alone in the classroom. School, emptied of students, was quiet. The only sound, the gurgle of the aquarium. He would never speak to anyone, not even his wife, about what happened in the classroom stillness. But that evening, he told the sheriff he'd dive for the girl again. Days passed. Rain came often, long rains that made every fold of ridgeland or a tributary, and merged earth and water into a deep orange-yellow rush. Banks disappeared as the river reached out and dragged them under. But that was only surface. In the undercut, all remained quiet and still. The girl's transformation, unrushed, gentle. Crayfish and minnows unknitted flesh from bone, attentive to loosed threads. Then the rain stopped and the river ran clear again. Boulders vanished for weeks, reappeared. Sandbars and stick jams regathered in new configurations. The water warmed and caddisflies broke through the river's skin to make their brief flights before falling back into their element. The sheriff called the diver and told him the river was low enough to try again. The next day, they walked the half-mile down the path to the falls. There were 5 of them this time. The sheriff, his deputy, the 2 brothers, and the diver. The sheriff insisted on 2 ropes, making sure they stayed taut. Water was clearer than last time and offered less resistance. The diver entered the abeyance as though parting a curtain. The river suddenly muted. She was less of what she had been. The blue rubbed from her eyes, flesh freed from the chandelier bone. He touched what once had been a hand. The river whispered to him that it would not be long now. When he returned to shore, he told him her body was gone, not even a scrap of clothing or bone. He told him the last hard rain must have swept her downstream. The younger brother said the diver should go back and search the left and right sides of the falls. He argued the body could still be there. The deputy suggested they lower an underwater camera into the pool. The sheriff shook his head and said to let her be. Men walked up the trail, back toward their vehicles, their lives. The midday sun leaned close and dazzling. Dogwoods bloomed small white stars. The diver knew in the coming days the petals would find their way into the river, drifting on the sandbars and gilding the backs of pools. And the diver knew some would drift through the rapids and over the falls into the hydraulic. They would furl amid the last bones, and like the last bones, they would finally slip free.
Oh, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. I feel like when I read your stories or listening to you, it's like eating the best apple I've ever had. And from the first bite of just, it's so good, to eating the whole core. It's such a visceral experience. That's how I feel.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, because I don't know any other way to describe it. But it's just like the description is so immersive. Like, I feel like and maybe it's because I grew up in Appalachia, a different part than the story takes place in, but I just feel like I'm there. I'm in the water. I'm with this person. I can see the things that your characters are seeing, and there's always just enough of the right details and never too much, never too few. Always impressive. Wonderful story.
Well, I like what you're saying. Whenever I read Ron Rash, I often develop a more enhanced sense of good and evil. I don't get the apple part, but I can see the metaphor there.
Snake.
No, thank you so much, Ron. That was it's not every day. I mean, as somebody who interacts with literature a lot, it's still not every day that you encounter what's quite frankly and quite obviously a masterpiece. That was such a delicious literary occurrence at the sort of intersection of the banal and the transcendent. I love the way the talking about the team and the cigarette, and then within 10 sentences, as natural as anything, voices that swirl around her head like a crown. Just like that kind of, there's almost this basis established from which we can go up into this place of deep meaning. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and there were so many years where I didn't know if anybody would be interested in what I'm writing. So anytime anybody has something good to say, I'm glad to hear it. It was a long apprenticeship, but yeah, that story was one I actually worked pretty hard on. I wanted it to almost read like a poem.
If you had said no, I just knocked that off one day.
I wish.
Wouldn't that be a nice gift to have?
No, I love so much of the language in there was the unknitted. It's like, oh my, that's you try and teach students like how much of the story should be awesome, all of it, and that really lives up to that kind of a standard.
Well, I think in Appalachian literature, you have so many, so many writers that inspired me. Lee Smith, certainly one from Virginia, you all would know. James Steele, and Jesse Stewart, writers that, and I think one thing that, and Robert Morgan and Fred Chappell, they kind of showed me that you don't have to just write short stories or poems or novel. You can do all of that, and I kind of I think that blending of that has been fortuitous. So the example that they gave me is really important, and I think we've just got those. I look back at some of those earlier writers such as Arno, Wilma Dykeman. I mean, we've got so many,
the Doll Maker is such a foundational text. I mean, I have taught that alongside the Grapes of Wrath as a similar narrative of migration, of looking at what happens to people when they're forced out of where they love to live, where they feel like they belong, and trying to establish new identities, and it's often violent and cruel and fatal. And reading those two books together, my students are just like, why doesn't everybody read The Doll Maker, since everybody reads Grapes of Wrath, you know? But yeah, those are, I mean, we're lucky to have so many legends in our midst of regional literature, and of course extends beyond the region. I love how this particular story, and all of them that I've read, make me ask questions. Like, what would I think about if I was drowning? You know, like, I'm a swimmer. I swim as much as I can. And if I was drowning, what would I think about? And I'm sure that other readers ask themselves that same question in that part of the story.
Well, there's a quote that's been attributed to a number of people, but it's one I try to keep in mind when I write. It's the role of the artist should deepen the mystery. And
I love that
questioning. Yeah, that quote's been attributed. I read it was said by Muriel Spark. I heard it was said by Francis Bacon. I still haven't quite figured out who said it first or who said it, but I like that. I've always tried to keep that in my head. Well,
certainly it was that ever prolific author, Anonymous.
Yeah. And whoever said it, I think hit on something that I find valuable as a writer to keep in mind. I think sometimes it's the questions we answer as writers maybe is more, but are more important than the answers, because the answers sometimes, or in a way, that's a little too simple. It's just, you kind of open up and to the point where the reader starts questioning, what would I do? What would I feel like? Those kinds of things.
Ron, I have to ask. So my students for next week are reading chemistry, and and both of these stories feature scuba divers. Are you a diver?
No, I'm not. But I've always been fascinated with water. What's on the other side of it? I mean, actually, my earliest memory is of my uncle's farm pond. I can remember the dragonflies. Just this, almost like there was a humming. There was so much life around it. I've just always kind of been drawn to water and the mystery of water and all of its religious associations, not just Christian, but also Celtic. And actually in this story, that plays a big role, because in Celtic mythology, water is the conduit between the living and the dead. And so I really had that kind of, that kind of played into particularly this story in a novel called Saints at the River I did years ago.
I love that novel. I was thinking, I didn't put the two pieces, I read them very far apart.
Yeah.
And hearing this again, I was like, you know what? Wow. The way that those sort of play together in the same park a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. We
have some comments.
Ooh, go ahead, though. We do have some comments.
No, we have some comments.
Go ahead.
So we've got.
I didn't see those.
Oh, we've got Donna.
There you
go. Donna is saying, "Hi, Ron. Such vivid and tragically beautiful writing. Wonderful reading."
Oh, thank you. That's very.
Our close friend Bonnie Proudfoot is saying, "Thank you, thank you." And
Jerry Rieger, who is a regular watcher of the show, says, "I really enjoy the rhythm of this story and your writing, heartfelt, lyrical in places, and your narration is fine."
Well, the accent is pretty. I can't do much with that. I have to, but I love accents, and
oh, me too. I have. There are people who hate some accents. I've never found one that I hate.
Yeah.
I just want to listen.
You've never dated a woman from working class Boston?
No, I haven't. I love all accents.
It's a piss out.
That's it.
All right. Ron, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay.
You at ASA.
Oh, yeah. One last thing. We got to make sure we show this.
All right.
Oh, that's right. Read Appalachia.
Very cool.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good
We'll see
night.
you all next week.